Hi, this is a quick overview of the live patient flow features as in versions 4.2 and 4.3. I'm going to demonstrate it on 4.3, but I'm going to refer to 4.2 occasionally to show you where things have changed as well. The idea of live patient flow really is to come up with key metrics which we now term as flow metrics as of 4.3, and that term has got a bit more meaning in 4.3 as well. But all of these numbers here, you can see the 2 patients in triage, 2 patients in resus are considered metrics, and the idea is just to draw diagrammatically a flow diagram using those kind of numbers. But the numbers are attached to live data within the system. This is a fairly comprehensive example. It's just a demo, but just to give you an idea of where some of these numbers are coming from. These numbers here, so this is all representing ED. These numbers here are all just based upon the area or in ED. So there's 2 patients in triage, 2 in resus, 1 in majors. These numbers are also patient lists that further divide the number of patients in majors by the triage category, which is a handover note. So this is patients in majors with a triage category of 1, patients in majors with a triage category of 3. This is the patients in ED who have the bed requested flag set. This is patients in ED who have a high EWS and the total number of adults. We've got the same information here for children's ED as well. This information here is all the number of patients who've had a bed requested over 30 minutes ago, divided by their specialty. So each of these again is just a patient list. So this patient list is defined as patients in ED with a preferred specialty set to AMU and with the bed request set over 30 minutes ago. So you can see it'd be very easy to create flows showing which patients are looking to go where and where the holdups are. These red flag areas here show a number of different points in ED. Virtually all of these top ones are patient lists. These some of these are database queries, which I'll talk about later on. Number of patients arrived in the last 15 minutes. Number of patients waiting to be triaged for 15 minutes, waiting to be triaged for 30 minutes. Number of patients not seen in the last 30 minutes. Number of patients about to breach in the next hour. Number of patients who've breached. And number of patients with a bed wait more than 6 hours, 12 hours, and so on. So these are pretty much all patient lists, but some of these are database queries, and hopefully you know enough about patient lists to see how we can create these. When we start talking about yesterday and since midnight, you can't represent these using patient lists, and these use database queries. As does the maximum wait times. They're all from database queries as well, that we'll see later. So there's 2 parts to this. The first part is the drawing tool, and then the second part is how to create those numbers in the first place. So I'm going to create a new live patient flow here, and edit it and just take you through the idea of what the drawing tool is. I've got 1 or 2 different types of things I can put on. The first type is nodes like this, the second type is text boxes, and the third type is tables. Those are the 3 ways I can represent data really. The tables all snap into place, so I can add several rows onto a table as such. And if I click on them, I define what the data is that drives that particular node. So this is driven by a patient list called ED All Children. I can change the title to say ED All Children and save that, and you can see that will now reflect the number of children in ED. I can put max waiting time and connect it to a flow metric called waiting time if there was one. ED max wait for wait to be seen. I'll click on that, and you can see that number is reflected there. And the same with tables. I can choose a patient list here, so I'll put adult majors with a category 1, majors category 1, So there you go. So these are just different ways to represent diagrammatically the same data. Really, I've got the same data sources for all of them. The other things I can do, I can group information by putting these dashed lines around things. So if I've got something I want to represent as a group, I can do that, and that allows me to put various boxes in groups, and I can also link nodes together in various ways too, for these kind of nodes, if you like. So it's there just to create a visual representation, and I can also add images on. So I double click and I enter a URL, and it will link to an image. So if you want to put a trust logo or something on there, if I want to delete something, I can click on it, and I just click on the delete icon there, and it deletes it. I've got a save button here. If I can save it as a 4.3. I've got a clone button, so I can save it as something else. So if you've got a good starting point for an image for a live patient flow, you can create a clone, and so on. Then I select it, and you can see it's filled with actual data from the system. And that's basically it for the drawing tool. There's a few things that are new in 4.2. We've added it on as a separate page under live patient flow here. So it's no longer under bed management. That restricts who can access those pages, and also there's a permission for who can edit live patient flows. That's a binary permission. You either can or can't. There's no such thing as this one's mine and nobody else can edit it. But previous to 4.2, anyone that could view them could edit them, which restricted their usability quite a lot. There are other ways to get to the live patient flows. We can create a login that goes directly to the live patient flow, and also we can use the Raspberry Pi devices to go direct to a live patient flow as well. So the information that is shown on this page can be put onto a permanent screen in a gold command kind of environment. When I'm looking at the screen, anything that's got a patient list behind it, if I double click on that number, it will take me to, let me choose a different one here. If I double click on that number, it will take me to a patient list view. I haven't got a profile selected, of those patients. So there are 3 patients that have been that are awaiting triage. I double click and I get to see who those 3 patients are. Obviously you can't do that on the Raspberry Pi because it hasn't got any input on that particular screen. There's a couple of other things on here as well that you can see on this more mature one that we've created. One is some things show in red. In 4.2, when you created the flow chart, you could say what the threshold was to turn amber and what the threshold was to turn red. In 4.3, that's moved into the admin screens, as you'll see in a second. And also you can see this history of values behind the number. This is test data, so clearly it just hasn't changed in a long time. But these little charts here show some idea of flow, with each vertical bar being a 30-minute period showing change. In 4.2, that information was only stored in the browser, and therefore it was always empty when you first logged in, and you had to keep it active. As of 4.3, that's now stored within the server, and as you can see, I've just gone to this page and it already has that history there. As part of that change, we moved away from using lists to moving these flow metrics. So if I click on this now, I've got an option of creating a patient list that defines what this number is, or creating a flow metric. From the next version, the patient list option will disappear altogether. In 4.2, there was patient list and flow metrics, and you could use either. But in 4.3, flow metrics have become more powerful, and the recommendation is just to use flow metrics as of 4.3 onwards. The basic difference between them is a patient list is, as you know, it's just a list of patients that is held in the system. So a list of patients in ED, or list of patients that have been screened for sepsis. All of those lists can be applied, but the actual historical recording of that data only now happens with flow metrics. In 4.2, flow metrics couldn't be patient lists; they were something else altogether. But when I show you the administration for how you create flow metrics, you'll see that now a flow metric can actually be a patient list as its source of data underneath it. So that bit's changed as a 4.2 to 4.3 change. So that's most of the things within the actual screens itself. If I go on to and one other thing that came in 4.2 actually, patient lists now have this concept of being an administrative patient list. So you've got a type here under where it says shared here, there is administrative, and you can use administrative lists within the patient live flow screens, but you couldn't use them, but you can see them as a clinician when you're just searching through patients. So if you use patient lists within live flow, there's nothing else you have to do. You create the lists and then you use them within live flow. If you're going to use flow metrics, then you have to do that within the admin screen under hospital here. We've got this flow metrics. Flow metrics were added in 4.2 with only one type, which was a database query. But as you can see in 4.3 we've got 3 other types here: patient list, bed metric and expression, which are new types of flow metrics. So a flow metric is basically a number that the system tracks, and it tracks its changes in real time, and it keeps a log of how that number changed. So for 4.2, this database query option hasn't really changed much in 4.3, and it basically allows us to look at numbers within the database, within our tables, to try and derive a number. So you can see things like number of patients admitted into ED since midnight has a particular database query behind it that drives that calculation, and we tell it how often to refresh that number. So in this case it's told to refresh the number every minute. That's one of the key differences between database queries and patient lists. Patient lists are actually to the second accurate, but database queries, they have to run every so often. So in this case they're going to run every minute. So the number of patients arrived in ED since midnight will only be up to date, updated once every minute. The patient lists can only track inpatients. That's one of the restrictions of patient lists. So they're great for inpatient areas or even for ED areas, but they're not very good at storing things like how many patients have been through the door since midnight, because not all of those patients are actually inpatients at the moment. So if there's 37 patients in ED, but there's been 100 through the door since midnight, you can't create a patient list of those 100. You can only create the patient list of the 37 that are currently in ED. So the database query option allows you to look at things that involve non-inpatient numbers, and EDs have got some good examples of that, of patients through the door yesterday, how many breached yesterday, how many breached since midnight, how many attended yesterday, what's the maximum waiting time to be seen. Another restriction with patient lists is a patient can only appear on a list once. So if you've got, you could technically have the same patient arriving 3 times at ED in a day, and that would count as 3 attendances. But if you're counting them on a patient list, they would only appear once, because patient lists are patient-centric and not visit-centric. So database queries allow you to get through all that and have more complex data. At the moment, database queries must be created by Nervecentre. We don't release the schema for people to write their own. So if you want things that require a database query, you need to come to Nervecentre and ask us to create those. The patient list ones were added in 4.3, as were bed metric and expressions. So in 4.2 with flow, with live flow, you just added a patient list onto the live flow diagram. In 4.3 we're recommending you take a patient list and you add it into a flow metric first, and you create a flow metric based on the patient list, and then you use that flow metric within the live patient flow. And this gives a number of things. Firstly, it's now going to track a historic value for that patient list. So I can do that simply by adding a patient list here. If I click on add and type CCOT list, it's added something down here on the bottom, and I can scroll right and just choose the patient list that it is associated to. Just one. And then I need to activate that list for it to take. There's a number of other things that can be configured on these flow metrics too. So I'll just walk through those and explain what they are and what they do. So you can see here's my CCOT list. I can choose a label. The label is just what gets displayed instead of the name. If the name is unwieldy, you can create a label that gets displayed instead, but that's optional. Group name allows me to group a set of flow metrics together under ED or under flow or under sepsis. This is only used by the mobile user interface, which I'll show you later in this session. Unit isn't actually used at all at the moment, but the idea would be you could put percent there, for instance, or something. Amber and red allow me to specify values that will change the color of the node from normal to amber to red. Again, in 4.2 these were actually in the live flow diagram itself, but in 4.3 they moved into here. The chart min and max values, you'll see on the mobile you can actually get the historic chart of what this showed, and you may want the min and max values not to just be the highest and lowest it's been. So the number of patients on the CCOT list, for instance, in this case, may have gone from 3 to 8. You might want to show it on a scale of 0 to 20, in which case you could put 0 here and 20 there. It doesn't really do anything other than change how it charts. The next option that's again new to 4.3 is bed metric. So bed metric allows me to specify a flow metric based upon a bed count. So bed counts are basically using this bed metric here, so we can count either the number of available beds, empty beds, closed beds, patients who are home today, maybe home today, EDD today, or medically fit across a number of wards. So here we've got 2 wards listed. So if I wanted to know how many empty respiratory beds I had, I could I would just click on add empty respiratory beds, and I would choose empty, and I would then list the wards here that I wanted it to use, and it would basically sum the number of empty beds across those wards, and that would create the number. Expressions allow me to use other flow metrics in an expression, so I can create things like percentages by dividing the number of beds by the total beds available in that area. So the expression here, you can see we've created one here which is just adult minors times 30. It doesn't really make sense as an expression, it's just a test one. The actual flow metric you're referring to, you just type the name in quotations, and you can just use simple multiplications and divides. So you can tie multiple flow metrics together, multiply them by 100, divided by 100, and so on. If you want a flow metric to be presented as a fixed number of decimal places, then I can specify that here as decimal places. So by default everything is 0 decimal places, so it's effectively treated as an integer. But if I want a percentage and I want it to be between 90.0 and 100%, I can put decimal places to 1. And then all I do here in the expression is I effectively create a number that's between 0 and 1,000 instead of 0 and 100, and it will show it as to 1 decimal place. So just in summary then, the goal really is to decide what you want to show. They can show flow, they can show bed availability, they can show where the waiting times are longest, waiting time for x-rays. They can show specific pathways like sepsis or fractured neck of femur. They can show things like ward performances. The list is really quite endless what they are able to show, and the idea is just to sit down and work out what you think the diagram would look like, then create the flow metrics that you want to show on the diagram, and then draw them into the diagram. The mobile has a slightly different approach to showing the data. It doesn't try and represent the diagram because there isn't really enough space on the phone to show that. What it does is just present the flow metrics. So again, in this case, this is one of the reasons why flow metrics are a benefit over the patient lists. So when you look on a mobile device, you can only see flow metrics, not patient lists. But any flow metrics defined automatically appear on the mobile device. If I want to add a new flow metric on, I click on the add button and it shows me all of the flow metrics that are configured on the system. So I can choose frailty, and when I go back, frailty will get added to my list. The information is shown grouped, so you can see I've just got a test group here called 1, 2, 3, but clearly you could group it into ED or flow or various other fields just by filling in that group name field here on the flow metric. You can choose to, and obviously because we've now moved the red and amber into the flow metric, it is being respected on the mobile device as well. I can click on these within the mobile, and I get a chart view of that data. So this is the current data. It's currently at 12, and the solid blue lines show me the values today, and the little yellow and red dots you see show me the values as of yesterday and as of last week, and I can scroll back and forward. It doesn't look very good with test data in there because the system's not running constantly, but you can see if I wanted to show that on an axis of 0 to 20, that's where the chart min and max come in as well. They get used at this point here. One of the things that we will do in a future release is add a link here to be able to get to the list of patients. So if this is driven by a patient list from here, then we'll be able to link through, so you'll be able to see those list of patients. But that didn't make it into this current release.